to another Fat Tony's Q&A session. Today our guest is Mahmoud Rasmi. Some of you know him better by his online handle DecafQuest. Whilst completing his PhD, Mahmoud lectured in philosophy for several years before, I think it's fair to say, coming disillusioned with the academic establishment. He now describes himself as unemployable and works as a freelance philosophy lecturer. And I have to be really careful here to call him a philosophy lecturer or teacher and not a philosopher, which he seems to dislike. He teaches courses online and is also the author of the book Sardonically Speaking. Mahmoud, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here and excited. And yes, as I said, unemployable. And I even have a shirt with unemployable in it. Some people even from classes decided to buy it, but I try to dissuade them from becoming unemployable because otherwise who else would be paying for my courses? So yeah, let's hope. Yeah. Anyway.
So before we kick off, for those of you that haven't joined one of our Q&As before, just a really quick overview of how this works. They last roughly about an hour long. And during that time, myself and Jack normally start with a bit of a preamble with the guest, have a little bit of chat with them. After maybe 20, 25 minutes, we then open it up to the floor and you're free to ask Mahmoud any questions you want. There are several ways you can do this. You can ask a question in our Discord server if you're on Fat Tony's Discord, and we will ask the question for you. You can type a question in the chat here on Zoom if you're on the call, and we will ask for you if you're shy. If you want to speak to Mahmoud yourself, which we massively encourage, just do the raise your hand feature in Zoom and we will unmute you. And yeah, you can have a chat with him. We'd love to have you all unmuted by default, but there's always a baby crying in the background or some random noise or something. So we do just have to mute. But yeah, so with that, yeah, welcome. So Mahmoud, you've recently moved to Spain, I understand.
Yes.
How's that going, man?
Great. It feels weird because I forgot what it was like to live in a normal city. So yeah, as weird as that might sound, it's been great. I love it here. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Your Spanish skills on point.
Yes, and I really love the language, really love the culture as well and the people. So I just feel at home here.
We should do a Spanish version of this sometime.
Pues sí, señor.
Me encantaría. Sería un placer.
Sí. Y creo que hay un público también español, as in there are many. I do get a lot of students from both Spain and Latin America, by the way. Like Leonardo here is one example.
Would you ever consider doing a foreign language version?
I did, like doing them in Spanish.
Oh wow!
The classes, yeah. No, I have thought about this, but for now I'll keep them in English, and then maybe eventually I'll try out other Spanish at least. Yeah.
Sebastian, that would be a branch out for the Fat Tonys, man. Going multilingual. That would be pretty cool.
That would be definitely a good idea to try things out. Yeah.
And Mahmoud, when I was at
Sorry, Jack.
I was at Complutense in Madrid and studied in the Facultad de Filosofía y Filología. And man, like Spaniards are some philosophy-driven motherfuckers for sure, too.
Yes.
It is like I heard 10 times more philosophy talk while I was out there in the couple of years I was out there than I ever did in the United States.
That's actually interesting to know because that's also what my general feeling about this. It's I am in Salamanca, University of Salamanca. I've studied here, both my MA and my PhD, and so it was refreshing for me to see that there were 30 students, I think, in the master's philosophy. It's like, who does that? Back in my university, in philosophy classes, had they not been obligatory, required, you have to go to take one philosophy course. I don't think anyone would have. Like, very few would be taking philosophy courses. Let's be real. It's like philosophy is useless also. No, it sucks.
Would that say? Would you say that's maybe the university you were at, or maybe the culture around it? Is it more driven around education as an investment or a return on investment?
Of course, because that's the however that might sound, but I mean, this is the more intelligent thing to do. No, try to find something for a living instead of just KOing your career before you even started. It's like, who hires philosophy graduates?
Well, I want to dig in on this a little bit because this is a cliche. I mean, kind of a cliche. Like,
of course,
philosophers are unemployable, but you know, it's sort of an interesting subject because there is an argument for almost every major outside of, I don't know, you know, your engineerings, your ones that almost veer on being a trade school. You know, what's it good for? What's a history degree good for, and stuff like that. But let me ask, like, philosophy. Do you actually think? I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, do you think philosophy is useless? But maybe a better question. In 2021, what are some things you think philosophy is like useful for?
That's actually an interesting question. And
overanalyzing movies, that's one of my favorite uses of philosophy.
Definitely, and I've given philosophy in film courses, and they were very they were interesting and popular as well for some reason. Well, because it's film. I did one on sci-fi, but
wow, wait, what? You did you did a sci-fi philosophy course?
Yeah, but I'm not a sci-fi kind of nerd, but we'll discuss that afterwards if you're interested, because I see that I caught your attention there.
Or maybe during, we'll see.
Yeah, like afterwards, after this, to try to think about the philosophy, but it really, let's be real, it is useless insofar as it's not you like, what can you do with a philosophy degree as an undergrad? Absolutely nothing. Maybe take on some administrative position. No, maybe, I don't know. Even many people say you can work at a bank, etc. Yeah, fine. So I really don't know. I think it depends on the country where you are at. So in some places, maybe they are willing to hire philosophy graduates, and other places they would, like in Lebanon, for example, they might not even, they wouldn't be interested because they don't know what a philosophy graduate would do. But
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's.
Are you familiar with John Paul Getty, J.P. Getty? He was, I think, he was the richest man in the world back in the 60s and 70s. American oil tycoon who was famous for being incredibly miserly with his money, and he famously would only hire classicists and philosophers. So they were the only two graduates he would hire. He didn't care about MBAs or anything like that. And it was just purely based off his heuristic observation that guys and girls who studied that were just much more successful in the oil business. I'd love to drill down as to why that is, but I don't know. But it's an interesting...
Peter Thiel's also a philosophy major.
A philosophy major, yeah.
So it's kind of like either you're unemployable or you're the richest man in the world.
I have a theory behind that, and I think just like in my case now, like I might not end up making enough money and not become rich, but end up living under a bridge. I found a very nice spot here in Salamanca under the Roman Bridge. I posted that picture
the aqueducts and everything.
Yeah, but so it's really like, I do see why philosophy people or history or humanities people would do good, because you're just trained to do proper research somehow. So even if you don't know anything about any topic, you love to read and know more about something, and you're curious, and you would spend the time doing proper research in depth to try to learn something. So you don't have any particular tools, you just have broad general tools that would allow you to just manage basically anywhere, except if it needs hardcore technical kind of knowledge, which you can also acquire if you take a few courses in math or whatever. And that's why, like, if philosophy is being taught as a double major, like you take philosophy courses and you accompany it with maybe some math and some physics and maybe some bio, I think you would be good. This is how it should be, because philosophy helps you really know how to approach a certain subject, how to tackle it, how to think about it, what kind of questions to ask, how to articulate your ideas properly, such that you eventually would know where to dig, what to look for, and how to come up with some sort of whatever proposal or anything of the sort, how to deal with any subject.
That way, it kind of is a little like engineering. It's about not specific to anything in particular, but take a problem, break it down to its component parts, figure out how to solve it, or kind of what the deal is.
Yeah, that's why many of it's very popular amongst engineers and computer scientists. So many of those who end up taking courses with me online now, the majority come from technical fields. And it's interesting because they don't usually study that. And then later in life, they find out that they missed out on something. And this something ends up being philosophy, because and the way they relate ideas together and the way they think about a certain problem or a certain argument, for them, it seems pretty much like you said, engineering or coding or whatever.
So
what? Oh, go ahead, Sebastian.
Oh, thank you, Ben. I was going to ask you about the courses that you're doing. So I know yesterday, I think it was yesterday from what I've seen on Twitter, you had a course kickoff on, I think it was existentialism. Is that right? Yeah. How do you kind of decide what you're going to do your courses on, what components? Is it just based off feedback or what's popular, or is it something internal that you think should be taught?
Yes and no. So it depends on what kind of. There might be three different reasons why, or different reasons why I would decide for one course or the other. But sometimes if I'm willing to try out a new course, if I'm willing to tinker, then I would think of something new. Like for example, in January 2021, I decided to do something new I hadn't done before, and I wanted to see the reception of it. It was called Love, Art, and Laughter, and it was popular, but I was willing to try something new out. So I knew even if no one signed up for the course, I just want to see whether or not people would be interested, and they were interested. Other times when I don't feel so adventurous, I would opt for a more conservative approach, whereby I just go with introduction to philosophy or ethics. And in certain, or sometimes like the existentialism course, I decide, well, I want to do something which is more popular, like existentialism. For some reason, people just like, maybe it's more relatable to them. And yeah, I decided, in this particular case, I decided on existentialism. For next month, I'm going to be giving philosophy of science alongside Philippe Caponis. I co-teach these courses with him, and because he's a physics and philosophy guy. And yeah, because we gave philosophy of science a few months back, it was very popular as well. So I thought, well, maybe we need to repeat that. People seem to be interested in science and in philosophy, especially nowadays.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
do you have
it's like whatever comes to mind. Like I can just do whatever, seriously. So if I feel like it, I would go for it, like the sci-fi one. Sorry. Yeah.
Hell yeah. No, I was going to ask, do you have a specialty within philosophy, or this may sound stupid, I am not very well versed in philosophy. I think Sebastian drags me into these because you know, he thinks I'm good at like cracking jokes and stuff like that. No, I'm just kidding. But this is, yeah, but I probably, of all the people here, including the audience, I might have the least, you know, background in philosophy itself. But I was going to wonder, like, do you have a specialty? Do you have philosophers that you focus on? Did you have philosophers that got you into the field? Things like that?
Yes. In theory, I know a thing or two on a German philosopher called Friedrich Schelling, who was some sort of a German idealist. So we're talking his dates 1775, 1854, so 19th century somehow. Yeah, and romantic philosophy as well. But what happens is that I've been involved in that for too long at university, trying to write papers and publish and stuff like that. I got fed up, and and now I'm doing the complete opposite. It's whatever is not specific, anything general and interdisciplinary. I'm more interested in now. But yeah, in theory, it's
Awesome.
it's that, yeah.
You know,
what was Friedling's deal?
Friedrich Schelling.
Oh, Friedrich Schelling. Sorry, I
Yeah,
got the name
Schelling.
wrong.
He was just he doesn't even know he's seriously, because they usually divide his philosophy into 4 different periods, the early, and then the middle, and then the later, and then the latest philosophy before he passed away. But yeah, he was interested in trying to somehow find a synthesis between science and philosophy. Broadly speaking, he was interested in philosophy of nature, and he was interested in art and religion towards the end of his life. At first, he started off as a romantic, and then things changed with time. So yeah, he's a bit difficult as a philosopher. That's why I don't usually teach him, or Hegel, or any of the German idealists. You really have to be immersed in the tradition to have some sort of background in order to understand what's going on.
I think this merges nicely with one of the questions we've had actually from, I think it's either Francisco or Francis C, depending on the username. But so do you use different philosophies depending on your circumstances in life or events or your mood? Or do you have one particular school that you personally adhere to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I will be responding that, but are you guys interested in philosophy? Have you tried reading? Have you tried, because it's interesting to see people who don't come from a philosophy background, how you conceive of philosophy. Like, have you ever? I would ask you the same question to see.
I used to be into philosophy when I was younger a little bit, never at an academic level, kind of more kind of a teenage angst level.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
But yeah, I know a little bit about it. I'd say, I think as well, there's a huge trend among the Taleb sphere, or this corner of Twitter as well, to Stoicism. Seems to be like super popular at the moment.
Exactly.
And which is, while it's super useful, I think it can get a bit cliched. Some of the stuff I read, I almost call it like broicism, because you've got like this cliched Stoic stuff going around. But and modern European philosophy as well, I use a little bit into when I was younger. Not a little bit of Schopenhauer and stuff like that, and I was interested with his connections with Eastern philosophy and Buddhism as well a little bit. So I know a little bit, but I'm by no means an expert.
Yeah, but your interest stems from just
I don't know, just when I was younger, just kind of like the big questions, I suppose. Why are we here? Where are we going? And then it kind of morphed as I got older into becoming a little bit disillusioned with maybe modern European philosophy, and looking more towards ancient philosophy and using philosophy You know, how do we just navigate life and live a good life
Yeah.
rather than asking all these big questions? So I've changed over time.
So this is exactly what I was looking for. It's I think it's pretty much the same, but people perceive philosophy differently throughout maybe their life, and I think the problem is getting stuck and thinking that you like one particular philosophy or a particular philosopher or a particular tradition, and just sticking with it and assuming that now you have the answers and that's it. So people might get very dogmatic about it, but I think it's very normal to just keep on, I don't know, being influenced to be influenced by different philosophers and traditions. So you started off, some people, I, for example, really liked Hegel when I was young, but then I realized because I didn't understand shit. And then afterwards, I started reading Nietzsche, and then Nietzsche seemed to be really interesting, but then, you know, because you become rebellious and stuff like that. And then afterwards, like you said, I started learning more about philosophy, and then academic philosophy, and I became more disillusioned. And just like in your case, after a while, I seem to have gone back to ancient philosophy, because I'm now concerned with questions, not so much about what is out there as much as just practical questions. How should I be living? What I want to live a good life, and I just want to be able to know that at a personal level. For classes, it's of course different because this is what I teach. So it's, but I try as much as possible to keep it concrete and to keep it practical. Like even if I'm discussing Descartes, I'm not interested in the just abstract, abstruse concepts. How is Descartes helpful for me? And if I can do that, if I can get other people interested in Descartes at a personal level for them, that would be great. Otherwise, I think philosophy can get very quickly trapped into these very abstract arguments that lead to absolutely nothing.
I tell you what did it for me is when you read certain philosophy papers, and this, I'm not slamming academia. Again, that's a very popular thing to do on this corner of Twitter, but I do think academia has a place. But
definitely,
you read some philosophy papers and they are just incomprehensible gibberish.
Yeah.
Like total gibberish.
Of course.
And so that's kind of what did it for me in terms of sort of going back to simpler questions.
If I can make a quick comparison, I'm a little more well-versed in physics and that kind of the hard sciences than philosophy. And I found string theory, which is super interesting, but leads itself to a lot of papers and a lot of things that are just kind of like circular loops of this proof causes this, which causes this proof, with kind of no grounding in reality. So I kind of know that sort of a little bit of that, what you're describing, a little bit of a circle jerk kind of thing that happens sometimes. And
you can very quickly end up being an intellectual masturbator, as I call that. Not only that it's an expression, but then this expression applies very nicely to philosophy and people like philosophy graduates.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And even in academia, right? Because it becomes not so much about like why. So it depends on why you think philosophy is helpful or is interesting. If you're just interested in philosophy because you want to do academic philosophy, then fine. But this is what because I became disillusioned with the way things were being done in academia, I thought to myself, I want to bring philosophy back to the marketplace somehow, along the lines of Socrates. Like, if I cannot, because of the way you have to write your papers, they end up being gibberish. Like if you ask me, if I read my PhD thesis now, I don't understand shit. It's really, it's incomprehensible, but then you have to do it because this is how things are being done. And it took me a while to go back to a writing style whereby people who don't come from a philosophy background understand what I want to say. And I've been trying to find my voice for the past 2 years, ever since I started, thinking, why am I doing this? If I want other people to read philosophy, I'm not interested in having a philosophy professor read my paper. I want people to read and become interested in philosophy. So yeah, now I try as much as possible to think and to write and to articulate in a way such that people would ultimately get it. Because why else would you be doing philosophy? If you're not interested in it for you, then it's just pointless.
So you
I
mentioned
think this is a big challenge for.
Oh, sorry, Mayak. Sorry.
No, please, Sebastian, keep going.
Are you sure? I wanted to come back to, so we talked about the gibberish in academia, not exclusive to philosophy by any means, but I wanted to talk at some point as well just about your journey kind of away from traditional academia to what you're doing now, and maybe how you become slightly disillusioned with that. Was that kind of the academic masturbation part of it? Was it the main part of it? Were there other factors? Like what led you down the path that you're on now?
Basically that,
Right.
because just like you said, unfortunately, and okay, first off, because I was based in Lebanon, there aren't many universities there, so there aren't your typical colleges whereby you can become a full-time instructor and just dedicate your time to teaching philosophy. So because there are only 2 or 3 universities that have a decent philosophy program, it's very like this. You have to become an assistant professor and then dedicate your career to publishing. Yeah. And I'm pointing this out because I've got this from many people saying, but why don't you teach at a whatever college, etc. Well, it's not the same. In the US, maybe it's easier for someone who's only interested in teaching philosophy to find a program where they can just teach. And this was the only reason why I got into philosophy, because I wanted to teach. I enjoy teaching philosophy. This is what I really like to do. I don't like to write papers. And I do have 2 publications, but then it's to keep doing that, to maintain your career, to maintain your position, to be to get your promotion, etc. That's, for me personally, this is just a lot. Like, I cannot do that. And until you get tenure, I cannot do that. That's why I'm unemployable in that sense. And I thought to myself, well, I need to look for an alternative. And that's why I decided, because I knew, like, even if, 5 years, 10 years, I will still be struggling with that because I just don't like writing philosophy papers. So yeah, that's why for me, it wasn't what I was interested in. And there was no other alternative where I could just teach. So somehow this online opportunity popped up, and I've been enjoying it ever since.
So is this, these online classes and like the, philosophy of science fiction and these ones, are these like privately done, like not through a university?
Nope.
Gotcha. I think this is, it feels like in 2021, this is kind of how you got to do it. I'll say, I know a lot of people, a few in philosophy, a close friend of mine who is a philosophy PhD has been struggling to get any kind of a professor job here in the States, went to a good school and everything. I just, I hate to say it, but I think the entrepreneurial, write your books, start a blog, start a podcast, start a Substack, all of those. It's like the way, if you're going to make a living at it, feels like a pretty decent way of doing it that maybe outside of maybe like the lucky 1% of people in academia isn't all that viable in academia anymore.
Exactly. And that's so back to the first point we were discussing, Peter Thiel and people who graduate or have a philosophy degree and then end up being rich. So I think this is why, as a philosophy graduate, you will have to find a way to make a living. And so you will have to end up taking risks. And more often than not, these risks end up paying off, like in the case of Peter Thiel. Other times, you might just be able to make a decent living somehow, like manage to make ends meet, like in my case now. So yeah, because as you said, many people, it's the market is saturated. Many people cannot find a job, and now with the pandemic, it's become even worse. So they have to look for an alternative. And that's what I did in my case. I had two options, or I keep complaining, because I was complaining all the time on Twitter and I was very angry.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day I was like, okay, I can complain all day long, but then nothing will happen. So I started thinking and approaching the subject differently. And I was like, okay, I have to do something. Let me think. So this is where it all started. I even uh, the idea of giving a philosophy course did not come up at first. I started a podcast, and then bit by bit I started thinking about what I might do in order to make a living outside academia. And one day I posted a tweet asking if people were interested in an existentialism in literature course, and 40 people signed up.
That's
So it
awesome,
was,
man.
yeah,
That
it
is
was,
awesome.
yeah. It was really nice. I was surprised.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's
Yeah,
been a very life affirming moment. You're like, oh wow, this this can work.
this can work.
Yeah.
The pandemic, I think, helped, because the first course I gave was in June 2020. So people were in lockdown around the world. So they were like, okay, they were
Mm-hmm.
reevaluating their life and the decisions they might have made. They must have been at home for several months, because everyone, at least the majority, were locked in. They're like, let's take a philosophy course and see how that goes. And
That's
yeah,
How are you
awesome.
finding the audience of an act, having taught, I'm sure, many academic, through the university philosophy courses versus a little more open-ended approach, online? How do you find the audiences of those two? Because I would imagine they were a little bit different.
yes. And first off, to be honest, I cannot compare, because at university, students are 18 to 21 years old.
True. Yeah.
Here, I get people from all walks of life, different age groups. So this is for starters. So the majority have a between like real life experience. They've worked. They've done so many things in their life. So the main difference here is that their tolerance for bullshit is very, very, very low. Kind of. Yeah.
I love that.
So
Well,
they're like,
if you're paying for your, you're paying for it in tuition, but it's a little bit different when, it's a requirement. You're an undergrad. Yeah, I feel that. And then two, self-selecting group 100% of the way, they don't want to waste their time. They don't want to waste their
exactly.
money, but they're
And
highly interested in the subject.
and
There's a
at
filter there.
university, they're very impressionable, because they're still kids. Here, it's different. And this is nice, because it becomes more challenging for me. It's not everything I say is going to be, accepted. I say sometimes I'm just saying something about Descartes. Like, I'm not even stating an opinion of mine or anything. I'm just trying to discuss Descartes, and all of a sudden they're like, no, fuck that. Descartes is an idiot, right? Just give me 2 seconds. Let me just discuss, try to explain where Descartes is coming from and whatnot. So yeah, this was a shock for me. Yeah, it might seem obvious, but it's when when you experience it for the first time, you start thinking to yourself, okay, there's something going on there. Because during the existentialism course, or maybe the intro, the month after, someone said, okay, fine, great, Descartes is great. Like, I understood Descartes. How's this going to help me? And I stopped and started thinking, like, you're right.
Matthias with the laughter emoji on that one.
yeah. Like it's because it's really, I can be explaining, for example, because ancient philosophy, as we said, they were more interested in a practical, how to live a good life. Matthias doesn't like Descartes, it seems. Descartes is great. Trust me. He had a nervous breakdown, man. He had a nervous breakdown because he was looking for certainty. But then he rebranded it and he was like, I had an epiphany. And eventually he made it look more interesting and more hip. But yeah, so it's when with modern philosophy, Descartes, Kant, Hume is a different story, but these like more rationalist, and in the case of Kant, other philosophers, it becomes very difficult to justify what they were doing. So this is where my job comes in. I try now, as I'm preparing for the lectures and preparing the slides, I now think of it in terms of a story. I want to approach this particular lecture from one particular perspective, and I have this idea in mind, and I'm going to be trying to make it interesting for them, for the audience, for people who sign up, so that they can think about it and try to apply it somehow. So I try to make it as concrete as possible. I don't know if I succeed or not, but then I try my best.
That's so cool. And I think, normally, I've got to say, normally when I upload these videos to YouTube, I do not include the text conversation box. But I think we're going to have to this time because the conversation between Matthias and everyone else is just too good not to include.
Yeah.
Right. Should we? We're well over halfway. I always get caught up in conversation and lose track of time. But should we move on to a few questions?
That's how it's supposed to go. Yeah.
See what people are saying. All right. I'm just scrolling through. A lot of them come through the Discord channel. All right. Let's start. Okay. I'm going to start with a relatively hard one. So what is this is from Francisco again. What is your view on Kierkegaard and his approach to navigating modernity?
Oh,
Sorry, man.
I will have to even like I will assume, unless I can ask what
He's not on the call, unfortunately.
Oh, he's not.
I mean, if you're here under a different username,
okay,
please raise your hand and you can have a chat with him. But
so I'll mainly, this is what I've been talking about is what Kierkegaard was also talking about. So Kierkegaard is a Danish philosopher, very interesting. He also usually is considered as part of a precursor for existentialism, because his main concern was institutions running and dictating how we live. So his main concern was with Christendom, the institution, the church, and he thought to himself, well, I don't want people to tell me how to live my life. I want to decide how to live my life for myself. So his entire philosophy revolves around this: an appreciation and an assertion of one's individuality. And he does that in several steps, and ultimately, in Kierkegaard's case, ironically, he ends up saying, I want to take a leap of faith, and he finds Christ. But that's in his case. But he doesn't tell you to find Christ or anyone else, even though this is what he thinks. But then, long story short, yeah, he was against all this abstraction. When we say the institution or the group or whatever it is, he was against that. Like, don't join a political party just because for them to tell you what to think. Think for yourself somehow. So yeah, I like that. I like this approach.
You know, I did read Fear of the little bit of philosophy I have read Fear and Trembling, which I found one of the most interesting, like almost thought experiments I've ever encountered. So yeah, that's kind of my one entry point to Kierkegaard, where it's taking this choice and just completely over analyzing it from 15 different perspectives of what could have been the thought process of was it Abraham before he's about to kill his son?
Isaac,
And I gotta say that is a deeply fascinating book, almost more from a psychology perspective for me as as not really much of a philosopher than anything else. I found that to just be mind-blowing. I love that.
It's precisely that. It's whether or not you're ready to go against the universal moral law. So to go against what God asks you to, against the universal, and to do that which is particular, to make an exception to the rule. And you make an exception to the rule because you, as an individual, you have to make the choice. And that's why the anxiety and the fear and the trembling, because you don't know whether or not the choice you're making is good, but then you have to make a choice. And if you're going to be saying, well, who's going to be morally responsible for the choice? If you say, well, they told me to do so, no, that's not how it works. You have to be morally responsible for your choices. So this is why I
authority.
Like
Absolutely, in his opinion, in this book, like authority is no excuse for doing things, but only under some circumstances. Yeah, it's been a while, but absolutely.
Yeah. So it's he's very interesting in that sense, and not only him, other existentialist philosophers, Nietzsche as well. Even though they approach or the way they deal with things is different, there are nuances there, etc. But yeah, it's as an individual deciding how you want to live your life. Awesome. So I think I think we all agree here that this is how it should be, because the more bureaucracy you have, the more moral responsibility dissipates. Like, who would you blame for the crisis of 2008, or for now the crisis of the pandemic and how the pandemic has been managed? Whom do you take to court?
Well, I know this is a super individualistic, again, corner of Twitter, YouTube, whatever decentralized platform we're on. But yeah, absolutely. And as you ascend that tier, you lose moral responsibility, you lose accountability. And I know this is why a lot of people around here are fans of localism, because you bring it down the rung a little bit and you get the accountability back. You get
who's making the decisions as well. You cannot just blame it on the system, and this is where skin in the game comes in. So if you're going to be waging war against someone, you might as well be on the front lines, because otherwise it's just very easy to say, well, yeah, we fucked, and then nothing happens. So,
I think this comes back to something Taleb said, just to throw away comment in one of Taleb's books about, historically part of the social contract with monarchs was that they'd always lead into battle and they'd be on the front line, like you're saying, and that has been lost, last 50, 70, 100 years.
Yeah, and it applies to absolutely anything, right? So it's this is where it's coming from. If you're going to be choosing something for yourself or for others, you should be held morally responsible if things go south or if something goes wrong. Insofar as, of course, you might as well be prudent in your decisions, because this is where the anxiety comes in. Because if you're going to be deciding on on behalf of others, and you if you're an investor and you have a portfolio and then you just invest the money somewhere, subprime loans, and then people lose their money and you're like, yeah, it's not me, it's just that the economy is bad. Well, no, because if you were a bit more prudent, you would not have invested in subprime loans to begin with, because you just wanted to make easy money. So this is where it's coming from.
The recent Afghanistan thing, I mean, there's a lot going on there, but that specifically that drone bombing as we were trying to evacuate the airport that ended up literally just killing a family with a bunch of kids. Like wasn't a terrorist, wasn't anything like that. It was, and the generals blamed the intel, but nobody on the intel side's getting fired. None of the generals are getting fired. Like nobody's, it was all just passing the buck on it. Saying, oh, we did, we're doing the best we can. And just disgusting, like non-skin in the game, like if the general's not going to take responsibility for it, if the leaders aren't going to take responsibility, who is? It's not going to be the dude running like the drone cam, you know what I mean? They're, 250th on the levels below. Like, why would, so
exactly.
And this is one of the, not to, I mean, to be one of those people that's like constantly bitching about modernity, but one of the things that you do see a lot is you don't get a lot of that, Hannibal leading his army. I think I read something that before 1500, I want to say, I might be slightly off on this, but something like a third of all English kings and princes died on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And this was par for the course, Richard the Lionheart leading, at the front of his armies and stuff like that. That's not, I mean, you don't see anything like that anymore.
Roman emperors as well, battle assassinations.
And
I'm not advocating political assassination.
No, of course, but we have to keep in mind also that it's also not easy. So saying that now you have to have skin in the game also is not very easy, because things have become more complex as well. So but it's interesting to think about these issues, because now anyone can make any decision, and then an entire, twice, the Boeing 7, the Max, it's like a plane crashes, and and nothing happens, and no one is held accountable. So if we had a different culture, more along the lines of the Greek, cultivating good character traits, whatever it is, thinking seriously about ethics and the consequences of our choices at an individual level, eventually, maybe this will not lead to all sorts of problems and disasters.
Well, it's like the Greeks. This might be one antidote to this increasing lack of skin in the game, but Athens, they used to have a vote, didn't they, every year, where they could expel and banish one politician from the city.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was used every year.
But that's tricky,
a very
as well.
modern way of saying
that is very tricky as well, because these very same people killed Socrates. They sentenced him to death on charges of corrupting the youth and creating new gods. And Socrates was not doing anything wrong. And that's why Plato struggled with democracy, because he was like, if these people can vote based on their personal interest, just like whatever, they came up with a story and framed Socrates in a way so as for him to appear like a shitty person, and they sentenced him to death. Although I might or might not agree with them, because Socrates was too fucking annoying. I imagine someone stopping you on in the subway and starts asking you questions about what justice is and what love is, and yeah.
He's like the ancient Greek version of an internet troll that you cannot block.
Yeah.
Yes, you'd probably punch him in the face. So yeah.
Right, I've got to move on. We've got quite a few questions coming through, so we're going to skip over them. But I've unmuted Ivan, who's got a question for you. So Ivan, are you there, buddy?
Hello all.
Hello. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Ivan.
This is my first time participating in such an event. Really honored to be with you guys.
Thank you very much. Seriously, thanks.
I enjoy your conversation. So my question is about professional ethics standards. Many professions have ethical standards which are like institutionalized. Institutionalized put like to me they more sound like laws or regulations than ethics. I'm not very familiar with philosophy and ethics in general. Do you think that philosophers can help in busting some irregularities and wrongs in these standards?
Yeah, this is actually a very good question, and a very tough one to answer, because I taught, for example, bioethics, right? And then I spoke. I'll just give this example because, and I'll try to answer the question, if at all I'll be able to. The thing with philosophy is that people are concerned with the question itself. More often than not, you don't really get an answer. Even if you give an argument, like, are you for or against, let's say, the easiest would be health insurance, public or private, just as an example. And then there are so many other topics, and environmental ethics and stuff like that. The goal of philosophy is to get you to think about these two different positions and to try to evaluate the arguments, and then to try to come up with a proper argument for or against, so that you can have an idea. Now, a medical doctor cannot really dwell much on these issues, because they have to act. Like, if there's something urgent, should I unplug or should I not? I don't know. Should I help someone who has some tattooed on their chest that they don't want to be resuscitated? Well, my oath says I should, because I'm a doctor. I need to save this person, but then this person does not want to be saved. Cancer treatments. If a patient does not want to get a cancer treatment, etc., and then you have different cultures and stuff like that. So I do understand why they institutionalize and make them professional. Because a doctor has to, in the moment, they have to be able to have something to rely on, because otherwise it will drag on and on and on. And there are so many cases, like an anencephalic child, for example, a child born without a brain. She was going to be dying anyway. Should they donate or not? They decided not, because back in the day, she was not dead, because death was not only related to brain death. So you have to act. But the issue is that doctors and professionals, CFA people, when you study for the CFA, it becomes, I do agree with you, once you institutionalize it, it becomes just something dead. You just do it and you don't know why you're doing it. You just memorize it. You just do that because you're just doing it. So I think what has to be done is, and that's what many philosophy people try, is to try to approach the subject, at least theoretically, such that they would create an awareness amongst these professionals to at least understand the dimensions of the issues they're dealing with. Like, you don't have to you don't have to know what the answer is, or you don't have to know how to act or whatever. It's just, even if you have a code set in place, at least they have to increase the sensibility of those who are involved in that profession. And I'll tell you another example. Once I was hosting a Q&A as well with a finance, with an economist, and I brought up the ethics issue, and they looked at me and they were like, "Oh, ethics." It's like, so like, what the fuck are you talking about? We don't deal with that here. So it's, and they do study ethics in their CFAs, but they study it as just, this is the code and that's it. they're not.
Another set of rules like accounting.
Yeah, it's yes, they don't understand the dimension of like, seriously, there's like, you don't have to be ethical, you don't have to know how to act, but at least have some sort of sensibility, awareness to the issue, right? So yeah, it's a very difficult one, because there's always, in the university where I was at, medical school had a different bioethics center, and they didn't want to have anything to do with the philosophy department.
That's a pity.
I know, because they were like, you guys talk about stuff we don't want anything to do with, and it's a pity, yeah, because so how can you incorporate that? Like, we try our best, we do give our own courses in the department we gave, but then yeah, it's the only thing that has to be done is to get people to think about ethical issues. Like, why is ethics important? It's just to get you to think about these stuff. Like with nowadays COVID, masks, and then with investments, investing in something, taking risks that you should not be taking, engineering, architecture, medicine, pharmacies, big pharma, right? Oh, thanks.
If I can, something, I used to read the Last Psychiatrist a lot. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, just a blogger, but he's talk a lot about the difference between, oh man, I don't want to say ethics and morality, because I'm totally going to script this terminology, but basically between the difference between people who follow the law and people who have an internal sense of what's right and wrong, and how this is very blurred in our modern society, especially like politicians and stuff. It's like, did you do something wrong? No, because I have total deniability for whatever it was, like the Afghanistan thing, versus the person who will pick up trash on the street when there's nobody looking, because it's the right thing to do, whether there's someone looking or not looking, and that feels like it kind of plays into this. And since I was kind of made aware of this difference, I see it everywhere, and skin in the game comes into it. But yeah, was kind of wondering about your opinion on that, sort of the difference between ethics and like the rules, or like ethics and like the law.
Yeah, usually that's the first thing that we do. We do. But first off, I'll answer that. Ivan, what's your background? Like, why are you interested in ethics particularly? Or just?
I muted Ivan again. Sorry, I will unmute him.
I'm an accountant. I work as a financial auditor.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
This is the most boring job in the world.
But yes,
I deal with risk, but only backwards. I see.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one example. I think you see so many things going on there. And yeah, they just memorize things. I hope eventually people like.
My problem is that with the ethical standards, they push regulations in the same format between the lines, and it's all dressed like ethics.
Exactly. Yeah. Because to be honest, it's to think about ethical issues can be very problematic as well. Like even when in class, and I'll go back to the question that Jack asked. So, for example, some people, the problem is everything has been politicized in a negative way nowadays, such that if you so much as try to at least give an argument in a theoretical argument in a philosophy class, whereby you're just saying, well, insurance should be private and not public. some people automatically get offended.
Mm-hmm.
So there's also virtue signaling there. Everyone has become nowadays, it's like you want to prove that you're ethical, and whatever is considered ethical becomes, that's it. So it's very problematic. Like you cannot even get people to think about an opposing point of view from a theoretical, non-political perspective. So you say now private insurance, they automatically associate it to a particular person, a particular group, blah blah blah, and then it becomes very, very problematic. I had that issue once in a class, and the person was like, I don't like how you give your classes, and I don't blah blah blah, and then they left. As for law versus ethics, yeah, tell me.
Wow.
No, I was gonna say, I think that this, as a lover of good conversation, this has ruined the art of conversation these days too, is that everybody's starting with the conclusion before listening to like what the actual points are. And everyone's so afraid that they're supporting something bad, that they can't even withstand like a 30-second hypothetical to just think about maybe a different perspective on it, know?
Exactly.
And it's, of course, there's like a contradiction there where if I'm starting from the premise that private insurance is bad, to just go off your example, which I don't really have many thoughts on one way or the other. But if I start with the premise that private insurance is bad, none of your points, it's like I'm not accepting any points, but then what are we even talking about? Why are we having this conversation if we already know the answer? And of course, the answer is that nobody knows the answer. We should be having these conversations to reinforce or to learn new things about our conclusions. It's annoying as hell. It's ruined. I mean, it makes like, it's one of the things that makes Twitter difficult is like any topic that's remotely controversial that gets a little bit of juice, gets some like retweets or follows, whatever. And you're inherently going to get people who are just completely blindly one-sided about it in the comments. Like, not
no one is
kind of a little cliched, but you must be a Nazi for thinking blah blah blah, or you must be a racist for thinking blah 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 for shit that's like very far
or
from
white
cut and dry,
supremacist. Like for me, I am a white supremacist sometimes, coming from Lebanon. I'm serious. I was called that, once or twice on Twitter. But so as for the law, the thing with ethics is that usually the law is not ethics, in the sense that sometimes law can be unethical, and the very clear example would be slavery laws back in the day. It was perfectly legal, but then ethically it's not. So you can still be, in this case, should you follow the law or should you look for something? Should you reevaluate the law? And so as a citizen, if it's perfectly legal to do something which you think should not be, what would you do? And if by refraining from following the law, as a citizen, now think in terms of vaccines and stuff, without getting into much into the but what would you do in this case? It's very, very difficult.
And there's always going to be a gap between law and ethics too. I mean, look at a case of if your neighbor's house is burning down, it would be very hard to make a law saying that you have to call the fire department, because one, there's just enforceability is very difficult. But of course, the ethical thing to do is to call the goddamn fire department. Like, you'd have to be a psychopath not to if you saw that happening. And so this is also one of the things of people who conflate those two, as an essential, like the example I was giving, very like, oh, I follow the law, of course I'm ethical, and it's like, well,
exactly. No, not at all. Following the law does not automatically make you an ethical person. And ethics is, because it's precisely a very difficult field to deal with, because different cultures have different ethical codes, and sometimes, so the question becomes, is ethics universal or relative? And when I start discussing these in an ethics course, many people find it very tedious because it's unsettling. Because once you start considering these issues at a distance, try to look at all these things, you're like, it's very problematic. I do understand why people don't like to discuss these issues, because really it's tough. It really is tough. One example, just for you to think about, without basically any moral judgments in this case. But the first article I start with in an ethics class is this German guy who put an ad on Craigslist asking for someone who would volunteer to be killed and eaten.
I know what you're going to say. Wasn't it his penis? Didn't he want to eat
he
his
started
penis?
He started with his penis, yeah, and it was consensual. So, and it was recorded, like everything is there. So it's not that yeah. So this
guys,
just
this was a weird time in my life. You know, I was living in Germany at the time, experimenting with things.
If there are any IT crowd fans on here,
they would know. Yeah.
There is an episode based off
about that. Yeah. And he's like, the guy I think was from England or spoke perfect English. So he's like, after the meat tasted like pork. I had it over several days, and afterwards I felt like my English improved. So seriously, this is just one example of something happening between two private entities, right? Two citizens, consensual. So just one example whereby if you really start thinking about this, it's like, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know anything, but it's just thinking about it is unsettling.
Well, listen, I think Giancarlo has got a question,
yeah,
possibly related to
thank you for
Giancarlo.
Hi everyone. Thanks for hosting this wonderful conversation. And
thank you for joining, Giancarlo.
Thank you very indeed. And I really appreciate Mahmoud, because I've been following him on Twitter, and I think he's a really super nice guy, as he's demonstrating right now.
Thank you very much.
My question is, my question is quite connected with what Jack just said. I mean, to what extent ethics is related to scaling? I mean, we are more or less very fond of the Taleb Twitter and his line of thoughts and in his books and so on and so forth. So what about the ethics related to scaling? I mean, you can be an ethical person on a local environment, such as your family or neighborhood, and what changes when you scale up to your village, your bigger town, or when you're moving your eyesight to an entire country? I mean, in my opinion, it changes dramatically. And maybe the boundaries are blurred to some extent. So there's no sharp dividing line in defining what is ethics from a local point of view or for society point of view. So maybe I'm a little confused, but I think you grabbed my question. Thank you.
I did. Again, thank you very much for joining. And the question is also spot on, because I, in fact, do teach Nassim's Scala Politica in my ethics course, because I want people to think about scalability in this, or in this sense, with regards to ethics. Because as you said, it sometimes is very easy to be ethical at a local level, but then it becomes difficult when we're talking about a bigger scale at a national level, federal, whatever. And that's precisely the point. I don't know what the answer is, but then we need to incorporate that. Like, assuming that there is one view that should apply to all from top down and everyone should follow it is very problematic because of that. Because what works, this is why Nassim says at a local level, I'm a communist, a family, blah, 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 right? Because it's very easy to offer help to in your neighborhood to collect garbage, to be a good citizen. But then if you're responsible for an entire country and you have to decide whether you have to go on lockdown or not, it's a very tough choice to make.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, scalability has to be taken into consideration, but it's really a tough subject because seriously, what would you do? Should you go on lockdown or not? But the only thing that has to be taken into consideration, I think, is that what seems to work, like in principle, for example, and I go back to these examples because they are the most controversial, I don't know, private insurance, public health, let's say, and public education, etc., works. But then what happens is that many people look at how things are in New Zealand and in Norway and then want to apply them to the US, for example. But then 4 million people is not the same as 280 or 300 million people, right? So we just have to at least consider that and to take that into consideration. It's not the same to rule 200 million people and to be ruling 4 million people. I don't know what's the population of Norway with a pension fund of, I don't know how many, $1 trillion, sovereign fund, sorry, right? So it's, yeah, it's insofar as we just get to know that, I think there would be less virtue signaling and people would be less, I don't know, would be less prone to partisanship. They would at least be willing to listen to the other. Nowadays, it's just people assume that one thing works for all and that's it. And this is, I think, the issue. It's like they don't take into consideration that things need to be scaled. And I really don't know if I answered. Yeah, tell me.
No, I'd say private insurance is a great example in this because people come down very hard and fast on what should be. And of course, what tends to be what we should have is like free health insurance, free hospital visits, being taken care of, everything. You know, it's like, it's very easy to say like, oh, this is a human right. And there's,
of course,
Sweden and Finland. It's like you have a baby, you don't pay anything. You get a broken leg, you pay nothing, $17 or whatever. And then in the States, it's like, oh, you have to have an employer, which isn't really true. If you don't have an employer, you just have to pay $300 a month for insurance. So it's what it comes down to. It's still expensive.
I paid mine in Spain 600 euros the entire year, which is weird, but yeah.
But it really comes down to the actual arguments tend to be not philosophical, but practical. You know, what does it cost? How do you, if Sweden has 100,000 people below the poverty level who couldn't pay for this, who couldn't pay for that broken leg, even if they wanted to, and the United States has 25 million people like that. What is that? What are those, practically speaking, what does that mean?
Yeah. I'll give you another example, Lebanon, but you're right. Like in principle, things like no one wants to see someone die for not getting treatment. But then take the case of Lebanon now. The country is broke and we don't have electricity. And the healthcare system is crumbling. So even if I'm the most I do want public education and public healthcare, etc. But then the country cannot afford that. What do I do in this case? The hospitals can barely maintain themselves now. So how should we approach that? And this is just one example, right? The economy has to be taken into consideration, and then we need to think about things in a way such that we would be able to know how to allocate resources in a way that would be fair to all. And in order to be able to do that, we have to think about things from different perspectives, not only from a purely ideological one. So, and then scale also matters. Like you said, the number of people in an X country, like it might be affordable for them to take care of, then maybe in a place like the US, 250, 300, I don't know how many million people, might be difficult. And then if the country is broke, you can be the most ethical person in the world, but then you just cannot. What would you do?
Yeah, does Haiti have an ethical responsibility to provide, you know, top tier A+ medical care to all their citizens? I mean, you could argue the ethics, but practically speaking, like
exactly,
it's not gonna happen for a long time because they just don't have the resources.
And that's why scalability in this case matters. And I do agree. Like, but I don't have a solution, and I don't think anyone has. But it's just thinking about scalability and putting things in perspective already gives you an insight into how complicated things are. Like you can easily defend any view, but then let's think about how we're going to be implementing it without this ideological baggage, without making it about who's going to win elections or who's going to be, etc. No, we just want I don't think that anyone wants to live a bad life or is wishing that other people live a bad life. I'm assuming we all want to live. No, unfortunately nowadays, like some people just don't want others to live. I don't know, they're just angry. Everyone is angry nowadays. It's weird.
I think that the accusation is actually more common though. There's a lot of, you know, you're talking about like people taking hardcore ethical stances on things that are like practically very messy, you know, like you're like, oh, you know, in some cases I'm for private insurance, and you know, people will leap to the thing of, oh, so you want poor people to die.
Exactly.
And it's like, no, of course not.
It's like no, not that.
Like,
it's not that. It's just whoever, because why? Because some people might be able to afford and other people cannot. So we need to think about like another example in Lebanon is with the government. That's one thing. The government has been subsidizing fuel, gasoline for the past, diesel, whatever, everything related to energy for the past 15, 30, I don't know how many years. So both people who could afford and people who couldn't afford were paying cheap gas prices. And now, because of all this, because of the subsidies and many other corruption and stuff like that, now we cannot afford to import gas. And they lifted the subsidies because they don't have money to do it. And so both poor people and rich people are affected. But if they had thought about it in a more, I don't know, the progressive taxes, I think, or so instead of subsidizing, you help those who genuinely cannot afford, and those who can afford, they would just pay for it, right? And somehow manage to look at the system in a way that would work. In this case, maybe it's better than just fucking everything up, and now no one has neither electricity nor gas nor anything. So in theory, it's nice, but then in practice, 30 years or 20 or I don't know how many years, where the country is broke, we don't have foreign reserves anymore, we're not exporting anything, and we're in deep shit because of this.
Cheap gas gets you more votes than high taxes.
Exactly. Sure. But in our case, it was both for those who could and those who couldn't. And that's the issue. So yeah. Same applies for anything. So it's principles at a country level, of course. So that's why. Another example is I don't know, helping others. Like everyone wants to feel like they're good people, right? And I love humanity. I'm a humanitarian. Yes, but what does that mean? You're a humanitarian. Caring about someone 50 or 5,000, 10,000 kilometers away, and have you said hi to your neighbor today? Have you have
Yeah.
did you have more often than not, they might be, they might constantly argue with their neighbors, but then they care about some weird cause somewhere and whatever, and they're like, yeah, thoughts and prayers.
Definitely had people who are like, going off about some moral thing, like equivalent of like the children in Africa or whatever, who have a shitty relationship with their own kids, and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, this is the point. So the scalability also matters. Like start with yourself first, help your neighbor, help people in your neighborhood, and people you actually see on a daily. This does not mean or that you should not care about other things, but then if you want to see change, like if you want to help, start. Many people, you can do stuff. And this is why I like existentialism as well, because they don't, like, Sartre talks about this what the love of humanity, and he criticizes that in his existentialism, his humanism. It's very easy to say I care about the humans. And in his novel Nausea, he also talks about this guy, the autodidact, who says I love human beings. Then this guy turns out to be a pedophile. So it's the example, in the novel. But anyway, so the point is, yes, it's very easy to just announce things in the abstract and say you're courageous and say you're a good person and virtue signal on Twitter and all that. But then in practice, like you said, you treat your kid like shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
it's a classic archetype, man.
Yeah. And at work, no one likes you and you don't like anyone. And then when you're driving, you don't, I don't know, you don't, in this case, follow the law. And yeah. So
I feel like this this needs to break out to a happy hour after we finish discussing if you're around, Mahmoud.
Absolutely. I'm down. Yeah.
We're already coming up to half an hour over scheduled time. It's just how enjoyable this has been.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
I've got one more question from the Discord room I want to ask. I try and get as many questions in as possible from people, because it's always a kind of a balance between making as many questions asked as possible that people want to ask, and having a conversation from those questions. So the last one I kind of want to ask is from Joseph Wassily. And after that, we will wrap up, officially finish recording, but then we will unmute everybody. And if Mahmoud want to stay around, if we just kind of freestyle it and have a chat that's not recorded. So the final question from Joseph is, oh gosh, it's a long one. This is from Mahmoud. What is your take on the notion that philosophy is dead, or that philosophy doesn't have a clear scope or methodology like science?
Yeah. The easy answer would be philosophy does not look like philosophy anymore. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the philosophy that is happening in philosophy departments is philosophy. It's just academic philosophy. But if we're talking about philosophy in the traditional sense, then here I would agree with Nassim and the likes. It can be anyone. It can be a physicist or any scientist, or really anyone who's genuinely seeking some sort of asking questions and seeking answers with regards to whatever, reality, what is out there, how to live a good life, and stuff like that. So yeah, nowadays the issue is that it seems to me that a huge part of academic philosophy has become more concerned with, okay, put differently, philosophy departments have, because philosophy departments tried to emulate science, this led to it became something unrecognizable. Because now they're like, I want to, like, no, philosophy is not like physics anymore. It's different. So yeah, but
Do you think philosophy? Okay, question as a non-philosopher, but I can give you my background, linguistics. So I was an undergrad linguistics, and there are rigid methodologies to linguistics. But it turns out it's not really like science a lot of the time.
Exactly.
And the methodologies are constantly being upended.
Yep.
Whereas in physics, I think those, the
Pretty much established.
scientific method and stuff is, it works like crazy. So I'd ask, in philosophy, is it something where it requires a methodology?
Yes and no. And in this case, I would go with Bertrand Russell, because I think Bertrand Russell makes a good point as to what philosophy does. Because philosophy is more concerned with asking questions, with getting people to think, with it's the methodology of philosophy is basically to question everything. So you cannot, being a philosopher doesn't mean sitting in an office and thinking about pointless stuff. This is why now we have philosophy of physics, philosophy of chemistry, philosophy of everything. But then who should be doing philosophy of physics? Well, people who know physics. But unfortunately, nowadays, people who know physics are not interested. Back in the day, Einstein was thinking about serious questions as related to the field of physics and the findings and the theories, because they were concerned. So what Bertrand Russell says is that the value of philosophy is to be found in its uncertainty, because the entire point of philosophy is to ask questions and, of course, to find answers. Like, you need to find a way to figure out, like, a method or a tool to try to answer these questions. But then philosophy is always there in the background asking questions, because once you have a method and a tool and you can find answers, it becomes something else. It becomes science. So when philosophy of nature, back in the day, Aristotle was doing all sorts of stuff, right? Everything was wrong. But then Aristotle was asking questions and looking for answers. But once you define the field, it becomes biology, chemistry, whatever, archaeology, etc. Right? But then your ongoing goal has to be to keep on thinking about the findings and your field and the important questions. So for him, the moment a philosophical question has an answer, it stops being philosophical. So if I have the answer now, that's it. Why am I still thinking about something? If we know something for a fact, that's it. It's like the Earth is round, right? That's it. It's we are not thinking about the nature of Earth anymore. But then there are other issues for which we don't have an answer to, and they are the most difficult. And this is why philosophy remains or is important, which is how to live a good life. What is ethical? We still don't have an answer to those, and this is why we should keep going. Yeah. What is just? What is good? What is beautiful? What is, etc. And then there are, more specific stuff like what is the nature of matter. But nowadays, I am not going to be answering the question what is matter, because I'm not a physicist. I don't know shit about physics. But then Philippe, the guy who teaches, he knows a thing or two, so he can think about it. Like Jack, you said you have a background in physics, or physics, so it's like if you read, like, of course, if you read, if you're up to date with the research, etc., you ask these questions: what does matter? And then you want to look for answers. So yeah. So the method, I think, yeah, it is a result of how you think you should approach the subject. So if anything, philosophy tries to get you to think about a proper method, because the scientific method was proposed by Descartes and Bacon, Francis Bacon. They're like, okay, how are we going to be looking for certainty and truth? Descartes was like, I have to look for something that can be measured somehow. I can break it down into pieces. I can evaluate it. I can analyze it. And then this is how I'm going to be reaching certainty. Francis Bacon was like, I need to experiment with things as well. I need to pile up data and then do induction and then come up with a conclusion. So these two people were philosophers were the people who suggested the scientific method that we use today. So their questions and the way they approached the subject led to the creation or to coming up with some sort of tool that helped us eventually do science the way we do it now. Of course, things have evolved and etc., but you get the point.
I think that's a beautiful question. Great question, but a beautiful answer to finish on.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
No, I mean, I wish we could. Well, we're going to keep the Zoom room open for as long as people want to hang around. But from a YouTube perspective, we're kind of out of time now. So I know a question Jack always asks that I shamelessly steal is, is there anything you want to plug? Is there anything you want to talk about? We will put links to obviously, personal websites and your book, and,
upcoming courses,
things like that. But anything you want to give a shout out to?
Well, first off, thank you again very much for the invitation.
No,
I enjoyed this discussion very much, and the questions were really nice. I Decaf Quest on Twitter, and then the courses afterwards. I'm teaching philosophy of science alongside Philippe Caponis, so shout out to Philippe. By the way, my book is available for free. Yeah, so anyone can just download it for free. Sardonically speaking, it's about also philosophy, and where I kind of take a jab at philosophers and say that stand-up comedians and rappers are more philosophers than the actual philosophy professors.
It's a great read.
I'd probably agree with that.
Absolute great read.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a great title too. That is a fantastic book title.
Thanks, man. Thanks. So yeah, that's and also I don't know if she is still here. Oh yeah, shout out to my wife, Benny, who stayed until the end.
Hey, Vanny.
Staying power.
Should we move the happy hour to Discord?
I don't know. I think we should keep it on here because I don't know if everybody here is on Discord. But I'll keep the Zoom room open as long as people want to. I'm happy to do that.
All right. That sounds good,
all right,
man. That sounds
Mahmoud,
good.
It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Just great Q&A as always, because we have such great guests. So thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending. Thanks. Really, I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Oh, Mahmoud, this is great. Thank you so much, man. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right. Take care, guys.